This is where I'm supposed to. Yes. Oh, turn this. You want me here? Yes. Well, together. Not the best the audience was all dark too.
Good evening and welcome to Poetry at the Dalí. I'm Hank Hine, and this is a series that is curated by Helen Pruitt Wallace. This is the umpteenth year of which we are very proud. Poetry doesn't always last this long, but the sustained success of this program is really due to Helen's energy towards it, the beautiful poems she writes herself, and her wide-ranging interest and respect for other poets. And so I'm going to ask Helen to introduce Heather and Dan today. But first I would like to thank our Director of Programming, Kim McQuarrie, Dr. Kim McQuarrie, who makes sure that all our programs flow together coherently. And I'd like to recognize the husband of the curator, Peter Wallace. And thank you, Peter, for also your longevity in this program. Poets' husbands don't always last that long either. But be that as it may, please welcome Helen. And please, Helen, will you read a poem tonight?
Not one of my own, but yes, I will.
Okay, very good.
Okay. But first, actually, Hank, though, before you leave, I was hoping you would read one of yours. Would you like to do that first, or do you want to do it at the end?
I'll take the liberty of doing one to start and one at the
Okay,
end.
good. I had asked him to do that because we're kicking off our 10th season. And so I just feel like, we needed something really special. So I wanted Hank to do that tonight.
So as I'm sure most of you know, Paul Eluard was the first husband of Gala, Dalí's wife, Gala. And he was a fantastic poet. And I wanted to read one of his poems because we often think of Surrealism as disruption, as incoherence, as inversion of the world as we perceive it. And of course, it is those things. But there was also this great respect and commitment to love, to the passion of love as a disruptive and cohesive force. And the love that Éluard had for Gala is phenomenal. You can read the letters that he wrote even a decade after they had separated and Gala was with Dalí. He's still passionately in love with her, and it's amazing. But this is a poem, it may be to Gala, I think it is, by Paul Éluard. I love you for all the women I have not known. I love you for all the times I did not live, for the smell of the open air and the smell of warm bread, for the snow that melts for the first flowers, for the pure animals man does not frighten. I love you for the sake of loving. I love you for your wisdom that is not mine, for well-being. I love you against all that is only illusion. For this immortal heart I do not detain. You think you are doubt, and you are only reason. You are the great sun that goes to my head. Paul Éluard. No, you read it.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to see you guys here. You know, our program, as many of you know, ends in June and then starts up again in this month. And we're going on our 10th season. And so it does seem like a big deal. And I have so much appreciation and so much respect for this museum, for Hank, for being supportive of it, for the terrific people who help us, including our tech czars in the back. Thank you, guys. All of this is live streamed. You can see it on our YouTube channel. So I really love having you back. But because we are also celebrating 100 years of Surrealism this year, so that's sort of a big deal, I thought instead of reading my own poem, which on occasion I do tend to wiggle out of doing, despite what Hank said, I thought I would read a poem, but honestly, that poem that you read was so beautiful. This is one, though, by Andre Breton, and I'm going to read it, you know, because he's the one who published the Surrealist Manifesto back in 1924, and that sort of defined Surrealism. And so I'm reading a poem that he wrote it's just called I was going on 5, it was going on 5 in the morning, and you'll hear that sort of slipperiness of images and some of the leaps. So that's all I'll say. It was going on 5 in the morning. The ship of steam stretched its chain to shatter the windows, and outside a glowworm lifted Paris like a leaf. It was only a long trembling scream, a scream from the maternity hospital nearby, Finnis Foundry fanatic. But whatever joy escaped in the exhalation of that pain, it seems to me that I was falling for a long time. I still had my fist clenched around a handful of grass, and suddenly that rustle of flowers and needles of ice, those green eyebrows, that shooting star pendulum, from what depths was the bell actually able to rise again? The hermetic bell, which nothing last night made me foresee would stop on this landing, the bell whose sides read Undine. Moving to raise your spear-headed Sagittarius petal, you had carved the infallible signs of my enchantment with a dagger whose coral handle forks into infinity, so that your blood and mine would become one. So, I'd like... Maybe at the end, Hank might grace us with one of his own poems if he's up to it, if he wants to, because he is a poet himself. And if not, it might be too last minute. But I'm hoping that maybe you would do that. We're kind of winging this a little bit, or maybe you'd like to do it now. We don't often get Hank up here to read his own poem. Yay! But see, the thing is, he always asks me to. So I'm taking advantage of this opportunity and this celebration to get him to read one of his. So, and then I'm going to introduce our poets tonight. So,
Helen, I think we're stealing time from our poets here. We're looking forward to your readings, truly. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about surrealism, and as Helen's pointed out, the 100th anniversary of the invention of it. And that passion for love was one aspect of surrealism. The other was disordering the world to try to reassemble. And this is a poem that I disassembled from a Greek poet named Callimachus, thinking that many of his lines were wonderful, and they were more wonderful when you kind of took them apart. For so long the brilliant sky, clearer than glass, nor was a wisp of vapor. They became warm, and the earth was warm, and cloudless stretched the heavens. I was refusing to hear death calling me, demanding again her well-made ladle, impudent eyes, lightning, as when on the Ausonian sea, the avenging stork was journeying with us. The swift northern squall from Marathus fell, olives which grow ripe on the tree, and wild olives, and the light-colored ones, upon the clouds, put to swim in brine. But you have been shorn to the skin, child, gentle woman carrying the children, the way that heart-gnawing worries do not traverse. The brilliant light of Apollo, the possibility of laughing without crying. Those two of mine ran up like aspens. God did not give miserable mortals the paths of the air, or the mist, or the haze, or laughing without crying. Callimachus.
Thank you, Hank. So happy to get you back up here. So tonight we have a special program. We've got Heather Sellers back with us again. She's been here twice before. Happy to have Heather back. And we also have Dan Albergotti, and we're so excited to have you here, Dan, with us. Thank you. I will introduce Dan first, and he'll read, and then it'll be Heather's turn, and she'll come up and read her poems. So, let's see. One thing they share in common is they're both BOA poets, which is actually a really big deal. Such a terrific publisher. So that was part of the bringing them together. They're also both in academe. So Dan Albergotti is the author of The Boatlands, BOA Editions, published in 2008. Millennial Teeth, published by Southern Illinois University Press in 2014. And Candy, LSU Press in 2024. Congratulations on the new book. He's also he's also the writer of Chapbooks of Air and Earth and Circa, the Unicorn Press in 2019 and 2022. His poems have appeared widely in such journals as 32 Poems, the Cincinnati Review, Copper Nickel, Ecotone, the Southern Review, the Virginia Quarterly Review. His work's been included in Best American Poetry, the Pushcart Prize, and other anthologies. He lives in Tampa and teaches at the University of Tampa. So welcome, Dan. So glad to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Helen and Hank and everyone at the Dalí for welcoming me here tonight, for Tom Blow Books for doing the book sales for the signing after the reading, and want to thank Heather Sellers for reading with me. I'm really looking forward to hearing her read. She just flattered me early by saying that she uses my work in her classes, and that's what more flattery can a poet get than that? So thank you very much. So you've corrupted some student minds with my work, and I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to read mostly from that most recent book, Candy. It came out in July from LSU Press, but because really this is my first Tampa area reading of any serious nature, I'm going to give you a taste of my first two books, too. I'm going to read one poem from each of my first two books to start, and then move on to Candy, and I'm going to keep track of my time. The first poem is from my book, The Boatloads. That was my BOA edition book. I was a BOA poet briefly for one book. The second book's from another publisher, and the third from a third. I guess I wear out my welcome wherever I go. But this poem from The Boatloads is a poem that was written in the year 2000. It then, when it was reprinted in The Boatloads, got featured on the Writer's Almanac, and it found a pretty broad audience that way, and it tended to have a little life of its own. People would write to me about it for some reason because it seemed to resonate with people. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, it took on kind of a viral existence. It kind of went wildfire briefly, and maybe you've encountered it before for that reason. And if not, that's not surprising either. But you might be able to figure out why this might go viral during a pandemic. It's a poem called Things to Do in the Belly of the Whale. Measure the walls, count the ribs, notch the long days. Look up for blue sky through the spout. Make small fires with the broken hulls of fishing boats. Practice smoke signals. Call old friends and listen for echoes of distant voices. Organize your calendar. Dream of the beach. Look each way for the dim glow of light. Work on your reports. Review each of your life's 10 million choices. Endure moments of self-loathing. Find the evidence of those before you. Destroy it. Try to be very quiet and listen for the sound of gears and moving water. Listen for the sound of your heart. Be thankful that you are here, swallowed with all hope, where you can rest and wait. Be nostalgic. Think of all the things you did and could have done. Remember treading water in the center of the still night sea, your toes pointing again and again down, down into the black depths. So that's from my first book. The second book is Millennial Teeth. This was from Crab Orchard Series in Poetry from Southern Illinois University Press in 2014. It's just a very brief poem, and the title of the poem is a very simple word, inside. In the lake, the cottonmouth. In the sea, the shark. In the soil, the growing seed. In the tree, the lark. In the dark, the insects call. In the light, the trust. In the child, the weight of years. In the steel, the rust. In the dust, the memory. In the air, your soul. In my head, the unsaid words. In the diamond, coal. In the hole, your polished box. In the earth, the quake. In my blood, your vessel ran. In these lines, its wake. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I don't only write litany poems. Those two are both certainly list poems. I'm going to read entirely now for the rest of the reading from the new book from LSU Press. This is Candy, came out in July. It's the inaugural volume in a new series from LSU Press called Sewanee Poetry. And I want to thank, for the audience broadly out there in YouTube land, Leanne Couch and Wyatt Prunty, the co-editors of that series, for trusting my work to be the initial volume in this new series. Thank you very much. Kick in the jaw. Sometimes the zebra wins, and the sound of the savannah goes on. Bird song, frog croak, beetle chitter, snort and grunt of a warthog hard panting of the cheetah after chase, as the lion walks slowly away, bleeding from the mouth, staring ahead, looking for a place to rest and a way to slow starvation. Sometimes the savannah's ambient song is interrupted by a sharp crack that sounds like a gunshot, the zebra's kick, finding the lion's jaw. Some stories get rewritten. Sometimes the lion dies. Always, the sound goes on. What took to the air? When my mother died, the purple martins that stepped out of her chest pulled themselves up into flight, gliding low over the grass of the campus lawn, foraging the air for mosquitoes. They waved their dark arched wings at me as they passed. And this is the truth. When dew evaporated from her grave, it gathered in the clouds, then fell back down to soak shallow roots that fed the xylem of the gardenias she loved. That's truth too. I was there, where flight and a light drizzle were twin ghosts of the fresh and godless air. Helen invited if I had anything surreal to maybe, I don't know that I get terribly surreal, but at least I've got some purple martins pulling themselves out of my dead mother's chest there. I think Dalí might have illustrated that part of the poem. Anyway, well, I was also in my conversation with Helen, she said if you had anything kind of ekphrastic maybe, responding to art. And I don't write a lot of ekphrastic poetry responding to visual art, but lately I've been very much writing about songs, about music, what I might call aural ekphrasis, and you'll hear a little bit of that tonight. That kind of is in the next poem. I have to tell you just one thing about this poem, or two things about this poem before I read it. The poem's titled The Beatles, and that's with two E's between the B and the T, so the insect, right? And it's an abecedarian poem, so it's goes through the alphabet in the first letter of each line from A to Z. That's the form of an abecedarian. And I need to tell you a little factoid, a little biological factoid before I begin. And that is that scientists estimate that there are 560 million beetles for every human on Earth. So if you ever wanted to wonder how many beetles are crawling around the planet, just multiply 560 million by 8 billion. Take a moment to think about it. If your world's share of beetles were to land upon you at once, you'd be crushed like a bug. Also in the poem, this was a little formal challenge. Buried in the lines are the titles of 17 songs by a pop rock combo from Liverpool, England. So if you want to play scavenger hunt as I read, there you go. The Beatles. All you need is love, little guy. Shiny beetle, tiny god nestled in your green carapace. You mirror back, my love. You don't let me down as you crawl all over every little thing on this planet. All 400,000 of your known species. Good morning, good morning. Every dawn you're here, there, and everywhere. When I see you, I feel fine knowing you're oblivious, just doing your beetle things. Even when kicked around by human feet, you dears just let it be. Just carry on. Go nowhere man can reach. And would you believe that I need you, bug, more than any human soul? Oh, darling, it's true. So let me watch you pass along this sidewalk. Here comes the sun quietly rising. If in its shine or rain, I'll just kneel here transfixed. Because there's something in the way you move that makes the two of us one world not found across the universe, what Donne called an everywhere. Voracious little thing, eat up my time. What else do I need but you nearly xenomorphic gem? Human life is so yesterday. I believe in you. I'm your zealot, your hysterical, screaming fan. So a bit of fun and laughter amidst all the darkness. The darkness. Another little scientific note for you about animals and insects, but animals here. Apparently they've studied voles, little field mice, and they've studied their capacity for empathy. And as it turns out, a vole is one of the most empathetic creatures. Like they measure the I guess it's hormone levels or something that indicates anxiety or something, and that a vole that witnesses another vole in physical harm has elevated anxiety that matches the other. So that's not much about this poem, but it's always endeared the vole to me. The elect. Like the vole, I have wandered afield under the greater sky, not knowing 9/10 of my brethren are already gone. I have found another of my kind and joined her walk toward the sun in its setting. I have entered the earth. I have nosed the root that feeds the vine. I have seen the remains of others, stopping and walking on. One morning I woke, and the other did not. I have felt the warmth that dries the dew. I have been happy. Above me, I have seen a wheeling halo of birds. This one, I think, more matches the idea of oral ekphrasis, like responding more fully to a song than the Beatles poem did. So this one is the longest poem I'll read this evening. It requires a little bit of explanation. I think at the Salvador Dalí Museum for a poetry reading, you got a better chance than your average crowd to find someone who knows who Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds are in the crowd. Maybe? Okay, so I am an enormous fan of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and this poem is about one of his songs from his album Push the Sky Away. And Nick Cave has been in that band, The Bad Seeds, for 40 years now. 84 was when they had their first album released, and they just released their 18th album a couple weeks ago. But before The Bad Seeds, he was in a band called The Birthday Party. They're from Australia. He was in The Birthday Party, and that was in his 20s, back in 80 to 83. And that band was described as music journalists as the most violent band in the world. Their shows, they're post-punk, right? Their shows were very confrontational with the audience. And in 83, near the end of the Birthday Party, they would often open shows with a song called Sonny's Burning. And the opening of that song, the first lyric, I guess, is a shout from 26-year-old Nick Cave. And that's the epigraph for this poem. And I'm going to shout it, so be prepared. I don't mean to scare you. Here you go. The title of the poem is Finishing Listening to Finishing Jubilee Street. Hands up, who wants to die? Nick Cave, age 26. Every time I've made something that I've thought might last, might stand outside myself, might live at least a while after I'm in the ground, I've risen, pumped a fist, and then fallen into bed, slept like a lotus eater, and awakened to a world of strange light, as if re-entering a life I thought I'd left behind. Everything still to do. Everything still to do today, to do tomorrow, to do sometime later on. The best poem always, the poem unwritten. This morning, I'm thinking about that year when I smoked 30 cigarettes a day and boasted it was a slow suicide to anyone who cared to listen. I was 19 years old. If I'd been Keats, I'd have had 6 years left. Now, 56, I'd like another 57, please. Or at least enough to make something right or good or worth redeeming all the wrong. Not that I've been guilty of too much wrong. Like Hamlet, I'd measure myself to be indifferent honest. But also like him, I could accuse myself of everything. And so I spend most days trying to earn self-forgiveness, futile but relentless. I start with prayers to lords of other worlds I conjure through a stubborn act of will. I lie myself into another life, momentary but made, and wander there, trying to find something that means something in the heart of a man I've never been. I've never been the son standing in jail with his mother as they both hear the news of the father's death, the surrounding cops chuckling. I've never been the father learning that his son has stepped off a cliff after dropping acid and fallen straight to his death at 15. I've never been a junkie, except for those cigarettes, and maybe for the high of making poems. I've never been Keats, certain of the truth of the imagination and his heart. I've only been certain of my own death. Still, I always try to make something else. There's a perfect song called Jubilee Street on Nick Cave's album, Push the Sky Away. No matter how many times I listen, I can't figure out how it progresses to that stunning crescendo from its slow, drawling start. And I'd guess Nick can't either. 3 tracks later, there's another song called Finishing Jubilee Street. And in it, he talks of falling into a deep sleep and then waking in a panic, searching for the beautiful young bride of his dream. The best song, always the song unwritten. Always a ghost drifting beyond your reach, hiding all away until unbidden. Everything to do. Everything to do. If I could have seen the birthday party play live in 1983, that year when I inhaled scores of carcinogens 200 times a day, I'm pretty sure my hand would have shot up when Nick Cave lurched into Sonny's burning with a question. But today, 37 years later, even Nick does not, I think, want to die. And as I said above, I'd rather not myself. So if the Lord of this world won't, I'll pray that the Lord of another one might give me a bit more time to live there in its dream, cursing a father, pulling a mother out of a conjurer's hat, reanimating a torn-apart dog, and inhaling a pure, innocent air. Maybe there I will make something that lasts. I'll fall into bed if I do, sleep hard, and wake to the miracle of these dogs and my wife and her red, red hair, O Lord. All of this coming down into a life too good for any man, where everything is still to be done. This strange paradise where I'd rather not finish anything. I'm just going to read 2 more poems, much shorter than that one. This is a poem about the last time I saw my father alive. Final visitation. After talking with him for 30 minutes, as he lay cocooned in a thin wool blanket, I told my father I had to head back to Conway. He turned his ashen face a bit and said, "Conway, that's where my son lives." I met my sister's eyes before fixing his in mine to say, "Father, I am your son." His eyes widened in that way that makes us say, "You look like you've seen a ghost," or as if he'd found himself the quarry of a hunt. I touched his hand before I left to show him I was real. I think I could have walked through walls to get to my car. So grateful was I to be that ghost. And the final poem I'll read is another much shorter poem than the Nick Cave poem, but another thing that I might consider oral ekphrasis, responding to a song. This is not about a Nick Cave song, it's about a Joy Division song. Joy Division being my favorite all-time band, a band from England, 1979 to 1980. You probably don't know Joy Division. If you might know New Order. New Order grew out of Joy Division. Joy Division's lead singer, Ian Curtis, was a young man who was really brilliant, but he was epileptic. And as the band grew in popularity and played more and more gigs, he began having more and more episodes and seizures on stage. And so he did something desperate at age 23, the night before the band were to leave for their first North American tour. He hanged himself at the age of 23. And this song mentioned in the poem is one of the last songs they recorded, a song called Atmosphere. And in the song, in the poem, you will hear the name of Ian's beloved border collie. He kept a picture of her in his wallet. On listening to Atmosphere one more time. After all the years of my obsession with every note and every word, with the bass and synth and drums and sweep of chimes, with the video in grainy black and white, filled with stills amid a funereal procession. Today, all I can think of is Candy, and how the people who took her in shortly before Ian died must have, surely must have, had to have, could not have shown her that kind of love that makes it worth being torn apart. Thank you.
Dan, thank you for that wonderful reading. Such a range of emotion, really. It's terrific. Before we move on, I want to do a shout out to Holly, who's here. This is Dan's wife. Welcome, Holly. Glad that you could be with us too. And you're a dean also at University of Tampa, correct? And I know there are several writers in the audience. I can't see all the way in the back, but we've got Lisa Birnbaum here and Brooke Sadler. We've got Sherry Ellis and Kim Turner, Sally Willis. I'm trying to see. If you're a writer and you're here, would you please raise your hand? We love having you. We love having you come. And if you're a writer on your way, maybe one of Dan or Heather's students, we're super happy to have you here too. So anyway, glad you all could be here. I do want to introduce now Heather Sellers. Heather has been with us here before, and also back during the COVID days once when we had a virtual reading as well one time. Heather is a Florida native, and she's the author of a craft book for poets on how to make poems. Oh, did I say Tyler Gillespie? Tyler's here too. How to make poems, and 2 recent poetry collections, which really came just like, one after the other. Field Notes for the Flood Zone and The Present State of the Garden. Wonderful books, as well as 2 previous collections, The Boys I Borrow and Drinking Girls and Their Dresses. Love the titles too. Her essays appear in the New York Times, Reader's Digest, Real Simple, Good Housekeeping, The Sun, New Letters, and O, the Oprah magazine, and the Best American Essays in the Pushcart Prize anthology. She regularly speaks to audiences about face blindness, most recently to employees at NASA. And her book, You Don't Look Like Anyone I Know, a memoir, was editor's choice at the New York Times. She's written 3 previous books on craft, page after page, chapter after chapter, and the practice of creative writing. She's also written a children's book, Spike and Cubby's Ice Cream Island Adventure, and a collection of linked short stories titled Georgia Underwater. Heather teaches in the creative writing program at the University of South Florida. Welcome, please, to Heather Sellers.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I know there's lots of things you could be doing on a Thursday, and it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you, Helen, for that warm, lovely welcome and for doing the series for a decade. I know how much work it is, and thank you, Hank. Just thank you, always, everything, all the things. Thank you. It's an honor to welcome Dan here to our poetry community, which is very alive and well in our Tri-City area. So I am not here to disorder poetry. I am here to bring order to the world. And it's just an honor to read with you. I have 2 books of poetry out, as Helen said, The Present State of the Garden and Field Notes from the Flood Zone, which was a Florida State Book Award winner. And both were written here in my home city, where I lived for 7 years in St. Petersburg. They're both sold out at Tableau Books, which is a good thing. They're taking orders, and I will come and sign your book for you. And I have a mailing list, too, if you want to get on my mailing list and discover all of my propaganda. That's all out on the to the book signing table where I will be after our question and answer. So I wanted to start with a note about a brand new anthology that's out called The Poetry of Grief, Gratitude, and Reverence. And it's edited by my dear friend and writing partner, John Brehm. It's from Wisdom Books. So you just know if the publisher is called Wisdom, it's gonna be good. It's not officially out until next week, but we have copies here tonight, and Tombolo arranged for that kind of sneak peek. And I have 2 poems in this anthology, and I just wanted to start with, in honor of my friend John Brehm's anthology, I wanted to start with a reading of his haiku, and I have his permission. And haiku are really hard to write in English because ours is an accentual Germanic language. We're not a syllabic language. So Japanese works really well for haiku because it's a syllabic language. So really difficult to do. In English, the haiku isn't about syllables in spite of what you did in 5th grade, which I'm sure was valuable. Your teacher was busy. But in haiku in English, it's more about this door opens, like this kind of hinge, this door opens. And so that's sort of the game with haiku. And I thought that it would be good to read them because a haiku, you don't have to do anything except sit there, which is what you're doing. And you just listen to it. It comes to you. You don't have to go to it. So I'll just read about a dozen of haiku written by my dear, dear friend, my best friend, John Brehm, and in celebration of his new anthology. So we'll begin with that. And it's kind of an amuse-bouche for the rest of the evening, if you will. Bonsai for sale. What shape would I take? Looking up from looking something up, the whole world is still there. A summer storm, the same thunder I heard as a child. So thin, the cat's ear, backlit by morning sun. Now that I'm old, everyone's saying how good I look. Newspaper ad, are you hard of hearing? Shouldn't it be in all caps? Just before dawn, my tinnitus takes over where the crickets leave off. Cool rocks in the river, the pain in my feet flows away. Reading to just 4 people, one smile makes the empty chairs disappear. Dan and I can relate. Well, I should speak for myself.
Amen.
Regretting something I said, turning the lampshade to hide the seam. The pain is still there. Weeping willow, my father cut down. I put my glasses on to see the fog more clearly. Coming unstitched, even the fake flowers grow old. Turning 64, the slowing down is speeding up. Those are in celebration of my friend John Brehm and on the occasion of his new anthology. He's a wonderful poet, and I hope you'll check out his work. So I'll start my part with a reading from my book, The Present State of the Garden, which won the Blue Lynx Prize. And the collection is about the present state of our collective garden. We hear a lot about how difficult, how much trouble there is. And in the garden, there's also so much beauty and so much goodness to remark on and to hold and treasure in high regard. And so this book, I wrote it during the pandemic, and in a way it's a love letter to my students and a reminder that the classroom remains this place where we write and read poetry, a sacred space, right? Maybe one of those few sacred spaces that we have. I present it as kind of an Edenic space in the book, a chapel or a cathedral where we're celebrating the word. the secular word that I think is sacred. So during a very difficult time in my life, I had this class, this night class, where so many of the students, it was weird, had the same name as people in my own life. And I'm calling roll that night thinking, is it legal in the state of Florida just to rename people? Can I just do that? Because I knew it was going to be very difficult to call on them all semester. So the first poem I'll read from that collection is called Accidental Practitioners. Accidental Practitioners. In Wednesday night's class, the introduction to form and technique of poetry, I'm teaching as though we're on a small raft. We are on a small raft. We may never see the ones we love again. Every poem is a message in a paper bottle. Revision is urgency with tweezers. How to pull out the bit not meant to be there. My brother died just before midterm this term. I have a student who has his name. I call on this boy as often as I can. I say his name aloud to alter my relationship to grief. I see you have your hand up, Sean. I don't know if my brother ever read a poem in his life. I worry I'm selling poetry as salvation, drinking and selling lines. And in this class, the same class, I have a student with my moved out husband's name. The husband student doesn't raise his hand or speak. And in this same class, I have a student with my father's name. He sleeps in the back row. I do not call out his name. I do not want to wake him. I do not put them in the same group ever. I spread them around and I watch myself closely be very fair to the husband named student. He's done nothing wrong. He got scared of what? Garden light and dying and death. Of what else? The interior experience. It is not well lit. After the midterm, I imagine they'll be back to themselves. The students will manage their own independent identities. Already after midterm, things are settling, but my bite is not correct. I'm always dubious about the last stanza. I walk in the evenings alone. I bought a linen dress with horizontal stripes I know he'd hate. I thought it would make me appear wider in the sense of unstoppable. But wearing stripes just makes me feel like I'm in jail. I read into all hours. I dread seeing him weave through town, rooms with women, his looky look. I know love, when simplified to its common denominator, means sorrow tomorrow. I know it isn't too late to change. Tonight, I'm introducing the English sonnet as a method for containing anxiety and grief's pulse. It works. We sit on the floor. We write by hand, 144 syllables. I call on my father, I call on my brother. Write the sonnets as letters to the ones we have lost. I have never lost anyone, my husband student says, out of the blue. You can lose me, I tell him. Pretend you will lose me. Inventory for a pedagogy at midlife. I carry few things not made of paper. Carrots, an apple, my canon of hot tea, on which I've scratched an H. I walk into the classroom carrying a tower of poems, begging my students to silence their phones. Come alive. Every breath rhymes. Every breath rhymes. We make contact. I bring them syllables. Outside the classroom, I'm afraid. We're afraid. I carry books into my bed. I sleep naked with books. No one knows how to live alone. And that poem is after a German poet named Günther Eich. I'm now going to move to my most recent book, which won the Florida State Book Award, and it's the BOA book where we have our kinship, Dan and I. It's a really wonderful press, and it's called Field Notes from the Flood Zone. I'm a Zone A person, as I know many of you are as well. Good times, and it's the season. So I wrote this book during the pandemic as well. Aside from getting drastically ill, I had a really productive pandemic in terms of writing. I keep a daily diary where I write down the things that snag me during the day, and I have all my students do this practice too. I'll just show it to you briefly. I always have to use this exact same notebook, linked in the comment. It's just like I write everything down. I'm walking around. I was doing this when I was riding my bike the other day at Flatwoods. My friend was late. She's always late. And this is live streamed. Awkward. But I was waiting for her, and these guys were talking about, one of them had an armadillo who'd gotten under his, concrete slab, and this long conversation about how to deal with an armadillo, which I actually know a lot about. So I'm writing this all down, and at one point these guys turned to me, and one of them goes, "Are you writing this down?" I said, "Yes, I am." Every single word. I'm writing the whole thing down. What do you think I'm doing? So here's just an example. My friend said the dead bug in my kitchen tool drawer is likely an American cockroach nymph, but it's hard to tell because the photo is blurry. So that's because I'm like, oh. So I have this bug. The whole household has come to a screeching halt. So I write these all down, and I have my students do it as well, and they capture such great stuff. The student daily diaries are so much better than mine are. Here's some samples from just this week. Woman with a cat on a leash walking. It's Tiggy's first walk since the incident. I mean, isn't that a complete poem? Just, they're done. They're done. They're just done. Here's another one from my students. Man walking a dog with a picture of the dog on his t-shirt, which says, "Sweetie's dad." Woman buckling a young girl into a car seat, and the girl crying, "Why? A dragonfly flying in circles around a plastic flower. A dialogue overheard, "I'm so pale. I am so pita bread." I could just read these all night. I require them to do it every day, and then we turn them into our pieces, our poems, and our memoirs. And that's exactly what I did for my project, Field Notes from the Flood Zone. I just observed what I saw and what I did. And so I'll just read two pieces from that, and then I'll conclude with my final poem. So this one is called Home. And if you live in Florida and you leave, you can't really do that and come back home because it will not be the same. Like, Florida will have taken it back. I see the newcomers nodding. Yeah, you have to be just very mindful when you return. Home. The highway empty, the holiday motel shuttered. Traffic lights dark, like eyes closed. The angry pulse of adult drivers taking turns at intersections. We are open signs. The streets are full of standing gray water, a city of wide canals. A wet rat walks along the top of the battered trellis with a cigarette. I unlock the door to my house and heat rushes out. As in a fairy tale, I do not want to enter. For a second, I sense my mother, long dead, emerging from shadow. This was all before I knew about the black snake in the living room, rising, uncoiling, a leather tube of silent tune. Protection. I woke with a dream of many flamingos flying low, landing on moss, and now walking all gently toward my body. I went to Publix for noodles and dawn. I stopped at Fatima's alterations to pick up the tunic whose sleeve I'd torn raising my arm too quickly and urgently in the city. A young chaflera umbrella tree sprang from my roof as though my house had a bright idea. I watched the felt sky lose its softness as evening and storm came together quickly, outlining my loneliness. That's when I noticed the caladiums I planted before the storm, slender black fingernails pierced from the dirt and shining in the rain, curling, come this way, this way. And I'll conclude with a poem that's, oh, sorry, I don't know why I'm apologizing to the podium. I think Taylor just explained that we're not supposed to do that. All right, so this is a longer piece that I'm working on, and it's all from my daily diaries, and it might be familiar to some of you because I read it at Boatloads with Tyler a little while ago. I live in Tampa Palms, and I walk every evening, and every time you pass another woman, it's an update on the gator situation. Like, no, it doesn't happen any other way. But they'll say there's one in front of Publix, there's a big one up there in front of the pond in Kensington, the juveniles are back in the puddle just ahead, like, be careful. They walk down the street, the women and the alligators. And we live among all these retention ponds in my neighborhood, and you just see these gators at various stages of development every single day. So you stop and you talk, and it's so interesting to me. So I've just been recording these conversations from all these various women. So it's a kind of just all different women's voices, and some of them are here tonight, these women who survived. Women in Tampa talking about alligators. Well, the babies are super cute. I wanted so badly to raise a few on our lanai, but in the end, we did not do that. You know, the mortality rate out there is incredibly high. Hungry males eat their offspring, but the big eyes on those juveniles, oh my God, those little grins, they're just so stinking cute. Our neighbor lady from Long Island feeds them chicken, tossing chicken out in the swamp, and you know the swamp comes to the edge of our pools. Finally, one night, my husband went off on her. That's how people get eaten. Y'all stop feeding them. He pretty much lost his mind on her. I was out walking with my husband. I noticed one of those white plastic bags from Publix floating in the pond by the fountain. I said, that's a shame, trash in this beautiful place. We got closer. It was not a bag. He said, it's a large plastic bag. I said, well, no, that is actually the hind end of a deer. He didn't believe me. Then we saw the gator. Medium size, I'd say about 5 foot, circling, eyes all big with those straight up pupils they got launching out of the head. Oh, they know when you're close by. They always know where we are. It's circled and circled around that piece of deer floating there, all snapping its jaws at us. This is mine, stay back. All mine. Yes, buddy. Do people here not understand the danger? I'm from New Orleans. Do they not know about the death roll here? Well, me, I live on the golf course. One night we run the dogs out there. We're careful, we're real careful, we are. What we worry about is the divers hired by the club. They do wear chest protection and rubber gloves when they dive to retrieve golf balls out of the pond. But last year, that one guy lost his hand, remember? And then another one lost a whole hunk of his shoulder. I'm absolutely certain for a fact they've lost arms and feet too, but we just don't hear about it. So much is lost, but we gotta get those golf balls. The sign clearly says, do not swim. Picture of a water moccasin, snapper, and an open-mouthed gator. But the kids, even little kids hanging out on the bank fishing, Up in the trees on those limbs over the pond, those kids just ready to fall in. I can't even look. Oh my God, where are the parents? That's my question. Where are the parents? In every single body of water in Florida, there is a gigantic alligator. I can assure you, he is not alone. The retention ponds are all linked underground out here. They travel freely using the underground rivers and the drainage system. That's fact. 14-footer, just sunning on my lawn. Where I'm from, New Orleans, they will charge you. Here, it's so weird. They seem to like just bask. But I cannot, for the life of me, understand people walking around so close to these creatures as if it's safe or normal. He was on my front lawn, and huge, just huge. How do I get to my mailbox? I do not that day. All I can think about is the death roll. You do not have a chance. Not even on land do you have a chance. They are an ambush predator. Remember when that woman's dog broke loose? I think her name is Cassandra. They've got all those little wiener dogs. And she was screaming at the edge of the big pond on the boulevard because that little mottled one they got, is it diseased or it's just like that? I don't know. But it looks like a snack. It had slipped its collar and was paddling around in the water. It looks like a snack. I could see the granddaddy gator down there that lives in that pond creeping across the surface, and I would put it at a fast creep. She's standing with her empty leash screaming. The Japanese man who lives in what's her name's old place, a lot of people have died in that house of cancer. You know, I would not live in that house. I personally would not. Anyway, the Japanese man was taking his trash can up and he must have heard the screaming because I saw him run back to his house. I have never seen an older gentleman move that fast. He brought his dog out, you know, that medium-sized dog he's got. I was terrified to all of this, but come to find out, it's best friends with that little dog. Somehow it just knew the danger, and from the edge, it got the little dog to come up, and then they were just playing in the grass. But that gator was so close. He was so close, and you know he's still out there. Remember that massive one that broke into the house in Safety Harbor and got into their wine collection? It was on the national news. All those broken wine bottles were everywhere. Maybe the people weren't home or something. I think a lot of destruction comes just from the tail. Yes, they are removed if they're aggressive, but they're rehoused, right? They can't kill them, can they? Aren't they endangered? Weren't they? If someone calls it in, then it's a nuisance alligator and a woman comes out. It used to be her and her husband, but he died in a helicopter accident. I've seen it many times. Everyone gathers. First, she baits this great hook thing with a whole chicken, the hook's in their mouth, and then they go to cache. You know, they cache their food in the sides of the pond. And then she drags the thing out of the water with a pulley system. I hate the humiliation. She binds the back feet, then she binds the mouth with duct tape. Then the front feet, she ties them together. She does it all by herself, but it's a terrible thing to see. The awfulness of it. This great creature treated that way. They haven't really done anything wrong. So where I live now, in Tampa Palms proper, we have an HOA, and they take them away in those cranes. We were told they were set free in the river or taken to that alligator ranch outside of Waimea. I picture a kind of wonderful retirement for them, food brought to you, dozing in the sun. Am I just making that up? Is that not what happens? No? Seriously? They're euthanized? Euthanized for what? For living? Thank you.
That was wonderful. It's going to make me think about alligators every time I walk outside. Thank you for the great reading. We're going to segue into our Q&A. And so if you have some questions for either or both poets, and also for Hank, we'll just have a conversation. So just raise your hand. And Sumaya, I think you have the mic in the back, right? So if you let us know, and then she can find you with the mic. Who has a question for this evening?
Can I shout out a question about alligators?
Michelle, if you don't mind, for our live streamers, thank you so much.
I was walking in the Florida Botanical Gardens this morning, and I'm always bothered by the do not molest signs, because I honestly feel like the people that molest alligators don't know what that means. So I'm giving you an alligator question. Shouldn't they change the signs?
No one reads the signs.
I'm sorry.
Other questions from you all? Samaya's coming your way.
Do we need to speak into the mic or we'll pick it up on the
Yeah, I think it'll pick it up without your hand.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just going to ask all of you or any of you, who would you consider to be the greatest poetic influences on your work?
Well, I can tell you some poets that have meant a lot to me. I don't know if they're influences or not. Like I mentioned, Keats appears in passing in that Nick Cave poem, and Keats is my favorite poet of all time. I can't imagine that my approach is not influenced some way by John Keats, 200 years ago in England, but I could not tell you how. I'm also deeply, deeply obsessed with the poet Jack Gilbert. So Jack Gilbert would be my favorite American poet. John Keats, my favorite poet of all time. I'm just throwing names out there. I love Bridget Begin Kelly. Yeah, those are a few from me.
It's a great question, and it's so hard to answer. It's like when you're dating, pick your favorite boy. Like, I like all of them. So I do, when I'm asked that question, I usually mention Robert Frost. I just think people think he's cheerful, and he's not at all. He's so interesting and thoughtful, and I just love the craft, the way he's putting the poems together. I read a lot of Japanese poets. I'm pretty undisciplined in my reading, pretty hungry. But I go back to Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost in my work a lot.
I was going to say Frost also, but you know what? I think I've kind of I found myself falling more in love with individual poems than individual poets over the years. I think, but with respect to I like poets for different reasons. I love Frost for exactly what you said. His use of imagery, that balance he has of being a narrative writer, but also showing so many metaphorical leaps. I love William Carlos Williams for his use of imagism. I love the Russian poet Anna Akhmatova for her, just the way she articulates this deep, deep sorrow that just is with us always. I love Tony Hoagland for his humor. And Russell Edson for the same. It's also sort of surreal. Anyway, too many poets, so many poets, so little time. Hank.
Well, I'd like to shift the conversation, if we could, to all these wonderful poets that we read, and whether there is some kind of commonality. And I was thinking, Heather, that remark you made, some of them are off the cuff, but very, very profound, and that is that you said you weren't here to disrupt. You were here to put the world back together. And also, Dan, I felt from your poems a lot of kind of epigrammatic coherence, that you're putting language together rather tersely to try to make a resonant sense following the phrase. And is that how y'all feel poetry has as what it has as its mission, to make coherence?
To make coherence, I guess, to a degree, but not to explain anything, not to make anything any easier.
to more coherently articulate the incoherence of life that we experience all the time. You know, who was it that said that poetry is, was it Auden that said poetry is the clear expression of mixed feelings? that to me, I mean, that putting things in order in a way that we can see something that feels inarticulatable in any other way doesn't demystify the thing being considered, but it makes it seeable. Jack Gilbert once said that in an interview that he thinks poetry is vitally important because it, well, he says urgently important. He said it makes what is important visible, and that's what I try to do in poetry. That's a very broad thing to say, what is important, but the most important things of life always seem to dwell just outside that realm of articulation, you know, and poetry tries to reveal those.
I think that poetry disrupts our habitual sense of the language, the kind of daily habit, like we're just sort of rote things we say and think. So it's disruptive in that way. But I really want to write poems, and I'm thinking of Yusuf Komunyakaa, another one of my favorite writers. Like we're really witnessing the world as clearly as possible and giving that to a reader. So in that way, I feel like that is an ordering principle that governs my relationship to the art. What do you think?
Yeah, I love really the comments from both of you, and I want to hear what Hank has to say too. But I think one of the challenges for me now when I'm writing is I'm trying to learn the different ways to make my poems enact whatever it is I'm exploring, because I really want to be very conscious not to be talking at the reader, and I think it's so easy to fall into that. So to kind of, I don't know, you know, it's hard because we all, I think as poets on a certain level, you do believe that poetry has a way of bringing people together. But if we can help ourselves believe that, maybe for me, it's in that moment when your poems are successful in enacting their subject matter, as opposed to talking at and being too didactic. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for me. It's something that I know I need to improve on in my work. But I think it's important. So that's kind of where I am right now on the subject. But how about you, Hank?
I'm just going to try to synthesize what the three of you said, which are, I love each of your approaches to this. Going back to one of Heather's remarks about teaching and having a class, that it's a secular activity away from the sacred. And I'm wondering though if, you know, that we have these great words in English, sacred and then consecration. And without making something sacred, you can consecrate it in the sense of partition it as something wonderful. And for me, that's kind of what poetry does. It brings the clarity that you spoke about, Dan, and also dramatizes, like you're saying, Helen, to bring an enactment into the real through language, these feelings.
I'm about as skeptical as it gets. Like Philip Larkin's one of my heroes too. Like he is an absolute, you know, total skeptic. So, but he writes in church going. He's drawn to it still. You know, he's because it's a serious place on serious earth. You know the poem "Church Going" by Philip Larkin is a serious place on serious earth it is. He's someone who doesn't believe a bit of it. You know, and he walks in and he appreciates the solemnity of the place. And even so, you can be in a secular space but still kind of be drawn to something that transcends, like you say, our daily, that disorders our daily use of language, that in a way elevates it, you know, to something. What's the word we're using in religious discussion? Numinous? Is that the right word for it? But something that rises above. So I'm that skeptical, but I find myself using the word soul and divine with my students all the time because it's a condition that I think poetry invites, of just, again, what is important. What is important is always outside the realm of articulation. It takes that seriously and tries to get there.
Yeah, that inebriation you spoke of, that without the poetry, the writing gave you.
Yes, absolutely. The highlight.
How about some of you all? Yeah, Tyler.
Hi, I'm wondering what excites you right now about poetry, either on a craft level or more generally, and what are you finding is exciting your students?
I'm teaching mostly intro students right now, so they're not much excited about anything. That's my goal. I'm trying to get them excited. I mean, I'm just 2 weeks in with these kids, but I think that a little bit. What excites me is, and maybe I'm making too much out of this, but it seems like for a long time, after the free verse revolution of the early part of the 20th century, you had this, and especially as it got, more and more away from the craft of formal poetry, that you had this academic dismissal of it from certain groups that say we've lost our way, the barbarians are at the gate. That's not poetry, it's not craft, it's prose chopped up into lines. So you had this swing back with the new formalists in the 1980s, and this group that wrote formal poetry and only formal poetry, and they were constantly kind of like those jackals smacking each other. And what I find exciting is how all that has mellowed out to the point that you see this enormous body of contemporary poets who work in form and free verse, just write at the same time next to one another, and it's very, very healthy. It seems like we've gotten beyond a very stupid way of thinking. But I still see it, especially in young writers, sometimes young people coming out of MFA programs, and maybe ones that have a certain professor that might be didactic about these things. You occasionally see this out-of-hand dismissal of form, and that very, very reductive sense of associating formal order with conservative aesthetics, and right there in the next moment you're in conservative politics, and you're making judgments about the person based on, and it's so stupid. There is form in poetry, and when I'm talking about it too, and the thing that was limiting about the new formalists is that they really advocated it so much that executing the form in the completely right, by the numbers way was the point, and you had these poems that were just empty vessels, that were just doing a sonnet to do a sonnet and show how technical. Now it just seems like the approaches to form and how many people work in both are so much more organic, and people are doing really interesting things with sonnet. The best poem, sorry, I'm going on. I'm excited about something. The best poem I think that's been published in that I've encountered anyway in the last 10 years or so is John Murillo's A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Gunfire of 3 Men in Brooklyn, which is a heroic sonnet crown. And you could easily miss that because he's messing with the rules so much, and he's using this really radical slant rhyming and various rhyming structures for his sonnet, so you miss it. You easily can. And instead of the linking line from the end of the last sonnet to the start of the next one, they appear first and then last in the next one. So there is that whole thing going on. It's an exquisite formal masterpiece, and and at the same time, it's not like the sonnet crown like you'd see anyone else do, and it's not following the rules as someone might have written a sonnet crown in 1900. So anyway, that's exciting to me, the coming back together and the reduction of this camps thing between free verse and
RI, real intelligence. So I all my students do AI assignments. So we look at the artificial intelligence, do an assignment, and then we do the real intelligence version. So it's all paper and pencil, no devices in the classroom, lots of technology and facility and agility with the tools, which are fantastic. But also they're excited about pencil and paper. They're struggling with hole punching, but we have gotten so much better in just 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And I think they like the punching, but just to feel a pen and to admire each other's handwriting has been really sensual and exciting. Slowing down, the slowest way is the fastest way, and going back to some of those spaces that allow us to not be so distracted and sustain attention for more than 25 seconds. And it's hard. The other thing, and I'm wanting to call on them to ask them what they think, but the other thing that I think we're excited about is these daily diaries, Tyler, and just like capturing the real world. Like that stuff is so great. And one of my students said it so well the other day. He said, every moment is beautiful and they're so fleeting, and we're capturing the human and the humane. And I just thought that is like the poster for what we're doing, the humanities, the humanities, and just that valuing of each other's paying attention and paying attention to the world. Nothing's too small to notice. So that's what I think we've been excited about.
I like that. I would say, Tyler, from you right now, and it ties in really so much to Dalí. My husband and I were just in Boston, and we were lucky to see a really wonderful exhibit up there. And it's a Dalí exhibit, but he's looking back at the old masters who've influenced him, or they put the exhibit together to show that, and it's just wonderful. It's so good. If you're anywhere near Boston, you need to go. And it's called Disruption and Devotion. And really, that's kind of part of what we're talking about too, because I mean, I think there are things about the old poets and the old use of rhyme. There's all of that richness of language that still excites me. But I think I'm most excited by the idea of blowing it up and then putting it back together, which is kind of what Dalí is doing, and what that exhibit so well shows him doing in light of the old masters. So yeah, it's I'm going back through a lot of old poems and taking them all apart. And I did write a sonnet crown that I don't think you'd recognize as that now, because I took it all apart and rewrote it. And so a lot of those rhymes are now internal rhymes instead of end rhymes. And anyway, so I am excited by the idea of doing that without totally throwing it all away. Music is important to me in poems, and I miss it when I don't hear it, but I do believe in finding new ways to suggest it. And maybe not be as heavy-handed. But how about you, Tyler? How about for your writing?
Oh, microphone. Okay. No, I really am resonating with what everybody is saying. This idea of pushing the language and pushing form, but making it interesting, I think, especially for younger poets and younger students. I was just talking with students today, like people are so convinced they don't like poetry for some reason. And I think like showing this range of voices and technique is really one way to show folks that it's really not that scary, and it's accessible. And I think that's like what you were talking about with this like academic approach in the 90s and et cetera, like kind of was a little bit elite. So I'm excited to hear your responses.
Other questions? Somebody, we have one down here also. Maybe after.
Hello. Okay, my quick question is, do you mind talking a little bit about how you, like from the beginning to where you are now, finding your voice? Did you ever write anything that was like a breakthrough for you? And how has your voice changed and developed throughout your writing and years?
Go ahead.
Well, a breakthrough moment is interesting. There was a time, I'd probably published 30 poems in literary journals when this happened. But I wrote a poem that ended up being in my first book, Boatloads, back in maybe 1998 or 99. And so I published, I've been fairly successful, been writing for years. But I drafted a poem that's titled Methuselah Dead. And the minute I finished it, and I can't tell you why, the minute I finished it, I had a different feeling, and I was almost certain of one thing, that poem would never embarrass. Right? No, I'm serious. And it's held up, right? That feeling is held up. But you have to go through a lot of growth with the mortification of having written work that embarrasses you. And a lot of people will get so mortified and so frustrated that they haven't reached any kind of breakthrough or felt like they developed a voice that they might give up, because that is a mortification. Alan Shapiro has this wonderful lecture where he says, the problem is the better we get at writing, the better we get at imagining getting even better. So that the gap between the writer we are and the writer we wish to be only widens as we improve. He says if we're lucky, we'll despise our early work. But anyway, so I often did despise my early work and would be embarrassed by something I'd written earlier. And it's hard to carry that baggage. But there was a certain point where, if you ask for a breakthrough moment, it was when I wrote that poem. And that feeling has held up. Now, I don't think that poem is anywhere near the best of what I'm writing now, but I'd be happy to read it, at a reading today, right? I don't want to disown that child. And I don't know how I got there, but I kept writing and I kept chasing that, writer I wish to be. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
So I honor your question. I think it's an important question. I don't use that word voice, so if it's okay if I revise it. I think it maybe is more confidence. I'm trying to not have a voice. I'm trying to not have my ego on the page at all, but to really disappear so that it's the reader's experience that's privileged. So less me, more reader. So voice, I don't want that. I don't want to feel that, but I think it's confidence. But I always feel super confident. Like I always feel, not only is the poem that I just wrote my best poem, but quite possibly the most important contribution to American literature. I always feel that way. I do. I mean, then people tell me you're not so much, but that's okay too. But I think it's more confidence, right? Like just feeling like I have this urge to utter, and that matters to me so much. And that I think that's what the voice is. So it's not so much voice on the page, but that I'm sitting there. But for me, it's just, are you in your studio or your chair getting your work done every day? For me, that's what's most important.
Yeah. Hank, how about you?
Well, I would just say, Heather, I think you may have failed. Because there is a definite voice coming from the page.
Yeah.
Even just what you hear in others is part of your voice.
That what I'm paying attention to.
What you're paying attention to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I appreciate your attempt to There's one more question.
So thanks for joining us. My question is, what is the best way to appreciate poetry? It's different than any other written word. It needs to be spoken to be appreciated. But you're sitting in your library and you're reading it, and you're not getting the most out of it. So how do you do that? I totally appreciated both of you, your readings. You read them, and you put the emphasis on certain words, and there's a rhythm. So how does the person on the street in the library appreciate?
Well, I think just take my class, which is called The Friendly Art of Reading Poetry. And I think your comment is so astute that you do have to read the poem aloud when you're getting to know a poem and you're reading it multiple times. There's things the ear picks up that the eye doesn't, and things the eye picks up that the ear doesn't. And then I think Dan and I have both been doing this for a collective total of 300 years. And so there's poems that work well on the page reading, alone in a library, and then there's other ones that are going to work really well read aloud. And so I think it's discerning which ones are going to be amplified or elevated by reading aloud, that they have something that is going to come off of the page. There's some poems that just you have to have the text with you in order to get those layers.
And I keep making reference to things I've read. And I think Donald Hall had an essay called Ways of Reading. And he said that, ways we read different contexts, different things. When we read literature, he says, if when we read literature, even silently, if our lips aren't moving, we're just being lazy. And so you do have to be, even like doing it silently, you don't have to read it out totally out loud to the empty room you might be in. But even if you're just like imagining the words spoken aloud, going on, you have to feel the texture of the language. And with all due respect to your question about your position on voice, or especially about an individual artist's individual voice, I think poems are always voiced, like you say. They require the texture of language in the air somewhere, or at least imagining that. So I would encourage readers of poetry to read the poem as if you wrote it. Right? Try to find in that, try to imagine you finding the rhetoric, what it's saying, and say it to the world. You know what I mean?
I love that.
And a lot of times, the other thing about poetry, that it's a good thing that books are short, right? Because every good poem just begs to be read twice. And in fact, every poem you read really needs you to read it twice. Because a lot of times, I read all the daily poem services, Poetry Daily, Verse Daily, poem a day from Academy of American Poets. And it's amazing how many times I will say, read through it first and think, that was kind of a dud today. And then I might have not even half paying attention at the time. And I'll give it one more read, and it will reveal so much about itself in just that second reading. Like a first reading of a poem is just a map for how to read it. So I'd say that too, if you have the time and the patience to try to read the poem as if you had written it and read it a second time, it'll really come alive.
So a little shout out. I'm on the National Council for Grey Wolf Press, celebrating 50 years this year. Yeah.
Good.
And I love the comment of the poet you mentioned, making the important visible.
That's Jack Gilbert, and Jack Gilbert wasn't on Grey Wolf himself. He was on Knopf, but he was a long time in a relationship with poet Linda Gray, Grey Wolf title. Who also loved Linda Gray.
And I wanted to add just one thing to that, because I think not only is it so important to read the poems aloud, and just like you said, Dan, to come back to them, because sometimes you'll come back to a poem and there could be a passage of time. You're a different person when you go back to that poem. There are going to be things you're going to absorb about the poem that you may have missed the first time through. So I love that, absolutely. But also for those of you who are writing poems, I think. Well, I don't know. I guess it sounds a little weird, but I think it's important to read them aloud as you're writing them, even your early drafts, for the same reason, because your ear will hear things that your eyes aren't going to catch. So those early drafts, your roommate might think you're a little odd, but go ahead and read those aloud as you're putting the pen on paper too. So yeah, and I want to do a shout out to Peter Meinke, who can't be with us tonight. He's in the Northeast, but he, as you all know, is our state Poet Laureate. I should have mentioned him first among poets I love, for so many reasons. But he used to really press upon his students, some of you may have been in his classes, of the importance of reading poems aloud. And not looking necessarily to understand exactly what the poem is saying. Don't try so hard to get meaning from the poem, but rather absorb the sounds of the poem. And if you're writing them, trust where those weird images go. They're coming up for a reason.
I think it's time to remind you that the books are available outside, and
They'll be happy to sign
would
them.
you be willing to sign and even have a little chat with our audience? Good.
Much as possible.
Thank you both, Heather and Dan, for really wonderful. Helen, thank you for bringing
Poetry, and thank you all for being here.